Good morning. Gambeh, OFX, and Payability welcome you to today's webinar. Your biggest day of the year is likely now behind you. Let's take a moment to reflect on your most important day and pick up a trick or two to improve your supply chain, manage your cash flow, and earn more revenue. Today's speakers will discuss their views to help build a global brand that scales. Our speakers are Zach Leonard, Alex Sklar, and Jason Sudbury. Let's get started. We're going to be maximizing business value with Zach Leonard.
All right. Well, thanks for handing that off. As I mentioned, my name is Zach Leonard. I'm president and founder of Gambeh. At Gambeh, we have the unique opportunity of working with 7, 8, and 9-figure sellers here, and all of them seem to have the same challenges that we start to understand for things that we do, which is how do I maximize my bottom line? And really, what we're going to look into today is doing that, both from adding revenue and cutting costs. And on the revenue side, there's really two ways to add revenue. There's two ways to really look at your bottom line. One is adding revenue, one is cutting costs. And from adding revenue, we're going to be looking at how do we design and create new products that are really awesome to differentiate yourself from what's out in the competition. On the cutting cost side, we're going to be looking at how do I source and speak with factories to make sure that I can get the best value for what I'm trying to do for those awesome products that you're selling. And so before I dive too deep into either of these, the first thing I want to know from a full perspective of everyone in the audience is how many of you have partnered with a factory that's overseas?
We had 80% respondents who had said yes.
Awesome, that's great. So the next question I want to move on to and see how this impacts the attendees is how many of you have actually visited your factory and gone and seen the factory that you work with overseas?
But it was the opposite of that. More than 3/4 have said no, they haven't.
All right. And then finally, what I want to ask is how many of you have sang karaoke with your business partner overseas?
I think we're getting some good responses here. A third of our audience would say no way, and 2/3 have said not yet.
All right. Anyone that said I have?
Nobody has said I have yet.
All right. So that's what I tend to see with a lot of people that I speak with and that come over to us for their customers. And for those of you who said not yet, you have the right mindset into starting the conversation of how do you cut costs overseas through sourcing and developing relationships with your factory. When it comes to sourcing products overseas, the main thing that I always preach to my customers and preach to anyone that I talk to dealing with an overseas supply chain is the value of building a relationship with your factory and understanding guanxi. And so what guanxi is the business culture overseas. And for them, there's a different mindset of how to really develop the relationship. It's not just transactional. It's actually meeting someone face to face, and which is why I ask those questions about who has been overseas to visit their partner and who has sang karaoke. Those are the types of things that really matter. So if you think about from the factory's perspective, what are the most important things? Payment is obviously the number one thing to them because they're doing all of their work and they're fronting all of their cash flow to you as their buyer before you even get your products into your warehouse. So a lot of people have 30-70 terms down, and there's 30% deposit and 70% once it hits the boat. But all of their work and all of their goods and materials are paid for before you pay your final bill. So there's a lot of trust that goes into that. So understanding that up front is really important. So if you're able to, facilitate payments on time or even early payments, that's like a great way for you to establish the trust and establish the guangxi for you to start getting benefits on the sourcing side. So next slide, please. So what do you look for when you go to a price quote? And this is kind of the first step after you build a relationship with your factory is every detail matters. Each component price matters, the sampling cost matters, the payment terms matter, the production schedule matters, and then there's always the ramifications of something that goes wrong. So if you go to the next slide, I'll explain to you what that actually looks like in reality. So if you look at the one on the right versus the one on the left, a lot of people that I've seen are getting quotes that are more replicate or more representative on one to the left. Maybe it's not that detailed. Maybe it just has some basic information. It has a factory address and contact and date that it was made, and maybe just has a high level overview of what your final product looks like and what the terms are. In contrast, if you look on the sourcing or the price quote on the right, it has a lot more detail. So it's every single component. So for example, this is an iWatch band or an Apple Watch band. If you think about what goes into an Apple Watch band, it could be that there's a piece of elastic, there's an adapter that goes into the actual Apple Watch. There's a tag that might be on it to have your branding on it, and then ultimately there's also the packaging. So each one of those components that go into the final product should be on the price quote. And the reason why is you're going to be able to start getting understanding of how all costs add up, and maybe you have other products out there that have similar components to it. Like packaging. Every product is packaging, and maybe you have a quote from another factory that says your packaging for something with a similar size is cheaper. So then you'll know that you can start negotiating with that. So ultimately, what you have laid out in front of you is a way for you to start the negotiation with your factory. If you go to the next slide, I can kind of give you a little more detail on what that looks like. But on all these things, the mold, there's basically everything that's talked about from a detail perspective laid out here, and that's the level of detail that you're going to need to start getting better pricing, because everything is negotiable. So, looking at your final price here, if it's $1 per unit, how does that line up with your expectations? If that doesn't line up with your expectations, maybe you want to negotiate the price. If the price looks good, maybe you want to have a lower MOQ because you need to have better inventory management on your end. If the price and the MOQ look good, then that you can start negotiating things like the terms, the lead time, the sample cost, the mold fees, everything that goes into the final component. So it's always a give and take when you're looking at negotiating your price. But ultimately, what you want to do is be able to have everything detailed out so that you can start negotiation with everything in your price quote. If you want to go to the next slide. So hey, you have your factory partner, you've developed the relationships. You've established your price. Now the final thing is to make sure that you have some sort of quality control in your factory and the value of what that really means. So I have a bunch of customers, again, that I work with that are pretty sophisticated sellers, and we took a straw poll from them and understood that for them the value of a low star to their brand on Amazon is about $500 per low star. And for them, let's think about it. If you're doing around $1 million in revenue a year, your time is extremely valuable. I mean, basically your time, if you think about how much time you spend combating a low star, whether it's physically doing it or stressing about it or seeing, figure out a way that you have to get it back up in the rankings because you got a low star, you're thinking about that your time alone is worth around $500 an hour. And so if you spend more than 1 hour on combating a low star review, you can pay that same amount and get a quality control inspection into your supply chain and limit the amount of bad ratings and avoid quality fade while doing that. And so, something to think about that you can inject into your supply chain right now and get better pricing is quality control. Again, we're looking at it from a bottom line perspective. And so, again, your time is valuable, and you can find ways to negotiate all the different things on your price quote that you have, but ultimately none of that really matters if your customers are not getting high quality products delivered to them. And so the final step into getting the best pricing and getting, cutting costs on your bottom line is to inject some quality control into your supply chain. Now I want to switch gears a little bit here and go into more of, how do you add revenue through product innovation. And so just to give you a high level overview of what product design and the value that is, so every design that we create, or every design that anyone creates for a product, gives the factory the actual blueprint of how to make your product. And I always make the parallel to buying or building a house. When you're building a house, you wouldn't try and build a house without an architect or a blueprint. It's the same thing for trying to make a product. If you try and make a product without physically making the design sheets and the bill of materials and the CAD drawings, you're basically letting the factory dictate the end product. And what they're going to do is try to make the product as cheap as possible. And that's obviously not what you want. You want something that is going to resonate well with your audience, or that you believe strongly has some data behind it that can make a difference in what is currently out there. So what you're doing is you're establishing the final details of the product through product design. It's going to save you a ton of time in the sampling process, because there's not going to be as much back and forth with the factory. You have the details established for you, so there's no way for them to mess it up if you give them the actual blueprint of what's going on. Also, from a pricing perspective, they're going to take you more serious, because it's something that looks way more professional than just approaching them on like Alibaba or an existing factory worker and say, hey, I want to make XYZ changes. Factories don't like when you do that, because again, they don't want to have to be creative. They're good at following the blueprints and making sure the product is exactly what's laid out in front of them, as opposed to being more creative. So from that perspective, the value that you're really establishing is not only on the final product, but also from an IP perspective. That's when you can start getting into utility and design patents. If you create something that is truly unique, the only way you can get patents on that is if you have some sort of sketch, or you have some final renderings of the actual product. So when you think about creating new products, there's three real ways, or adding revenue, there's three real ways to do this. There's white labeling, there's incremental innovation, and there's new product development. And I'm going to go into detail what those mean. So white label is basically you're just taking something that already exists, adding it to your catalog. There's incremental innovation, which is taking an existing product and enhancing it. And there's a new product, which is basically creating something from scratch that does not exist out there in the market. And from my perspective, new product is much harder to do for an Amazon seller. You got to have a lot more validation, a lot more conviction, a lot more money to spend to do that. White labeling is a great way to add to your bottom line, but it's not really defensible. And as we're starting to see on the Amazon space in general, 40% of Amazon sellers are now Chinese sellers, and a lot of them being factories. And so there's not really any defense there for them to come in and start to take over that space in the white labeling. So today, what I want to focus on is what I think is really relevant for the Amazon space, which is incremental innovation. So there's a company out there based in Austin where Gambeh is based, called Yeti, and they did a great job of highlighting what I mean by incremental innovation. So they're taking existing products and enhancing the usability and potentially even enhancing their bottom line as a result. And so if you take a look at the product on the left versus the product on the right, it's pretty much the same product, right? The only difference is there's some different materials used to help solve the age-old problem of how to keep your drinks cold. The difference between the product on the right and the left from a mold perspective is very minimal. They're both using the same molds. The difference is that they're using different source materials. So the product on the left is using maybe acrylic or glass, versus the product on the right, which is using some insulated material that goes around a metal surface. And so when you think about incremental innovation, Yeti did a great job at doing this, and now there's copycats out there trying to mimic what Yeti does. But the difference is that Yeti almost did $800 million in revenue in 2018. The other companies didn't. And so if you think about that perspective, incremental innovation is a very viable way for Amazon sellers to create product opportunities and increase their bottom line by increasing revenue. So if you have the next slide, we'll kind of look at what that looks like here. So from a bottom line perspective, if you just look at what the pricing looks like on the right versus the left. So Yeti, they charge 4 times as much as the average. They charge 4 times as much as the average, wine glass here. So they're charging $40 versus $12. And let's assume that apples to apples, the marketing and COGS are 70%, 75%. So, looking at it as $23 versus $9. Then you look at their gross margin dollars, which is really what you're looking at in terms of their bottom line. It's almost 3 times as much from a bottom line perspective. And so what I'm trying to highlight here is they're using the same molds, they're using different source materials, but if you look at what they're solving, it's the same thing. And if you look at how they branded themselves, Yeti obviously branded themselves as a premium product, and as a result, they're able to increase their gross margin dollars and increase their bottom line. So this is something that is extremely attainable from a Amazon seller perspective. So basically what I want to explain here is that, the 2 main things that you can look at is making sure that you have the research out there, and there's tools that do that, like Helium 10, where you can find product opportunities, or Jungle Scout, you can find product opportunities, really understand what's out there. And then have your reviews kind of guide your design. So, let's say that you find, for example, an opportunity out there that I can share one with you that I have right now. There's an opportunity that I've seen based on Helium 10 for cake stands. And so if I look at the cake stands, they all kind of look the same. But the product opportunities, like maybe, there's some changes that you can make in the design. And so, I went on Pinterest and Etsy and I searched cake stands, and all of a sudden I'm seeing all these wooden cake stands that are kind of where the trends are going. And so then I went back to Amazon and I looked on Amazon and saw that there were barely any wooden cake stands out there. And so right there, you're kind of letting say, okay, I see the opportunity. I go check out an external website and maybe, like Pinterest or Etsy, and see that, there's probably a trend potential for you in the cake stand market. And now I see that all the new ones that are being created are page 1 on Etsy and Pinterest are made out of wood. And so now you have the opportunity to, design a product made from a different material that is incrementally innovative in comparison to what's already out there on the market. And so again, that's something that this is something that if you do the research, you don't have to, pay a ton of money to make new molds. The research is already out there, so you validate the opportunity, and you can make an incrementally innovative product. You can add some revenue to your bottom line. And what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Payability to explain, ways that you can finance those products that you're trying to add revenue to your bottom line for.
Yeah, and thank you, Zach. It's I think the product discovery side is so tremendous, and it does lead kind of seamlessly into being able to finance. And so I'm Alex Sklar. I'm the head of business development for Payability, a financial technology company offering financing, working capital, and payment solutions to e-commerce businesses and marketplace sellers. So let's dive right in. We're going to start by looking at the financing landscape. So I'd first like to start with just a little disclaimer of sorts. Everything you're going to hear will be based on my firsthand knowledge and experience. There are thousands of different financial institutions out there, and all of them are different. I don't claim to be an expert on everything financial, and we always suggest you do your homework on any financing decision. But it's my goal to be able to walk you through and introduce some of the most prevalent financing options for e-commerce businesses. So businesses of all sizes are often overwhelmed when trying to discover all the financing options out there. Whether we're researching through blogs, looking at lenders' websites, talking to colleagues and trade associations, or even just talking to friends, the information never seems to be readily available, concise, and informative. We often just work off of anecdotes that we hear from other people, or loose information that kind of gets passed down to us. But we kind of want to take it from a holistic approach. So it's important to remember when looking at options that a lot of options are tailored for specific purposes. Buying equipment, like a forklift, is very different from buying inventory through Gambeh or what Zach was describing. When we're buying equipment, we're looking to have that equipment for years and for our own use. When we're buying inventory, our goal is to have it for a short amount of time, ideally, and then sell it. Thus, different financing situations would serve different purposes in these situations. Understanding what options there are for you first starts with understanding what you're trying to accomplish. Start by trying to ask yourself what's most important to you, and maybe even try to rank it. How fast do I need the funds? Having the most time to pay it back, or having the lowest interest rate? The reality is that's very hard to have all three at the same time. We often have to make slight trade-offs for one or the other. Next, we want to ask ourselves some questions regarding how much we're going to put into the process of receiving financing and what we're willing to offer to the lender to diffuse risk, like collateral, which is an asset that can be forfeited in the event of default. Some things we want to understand are, do I want to specify how I'm going to spend the money and use it for a specific reason? Some lenders require that they know exactly what the money will be used for. Do I want to create a business plan? Like specifying money, business plans are needed in some situations to detail how the money will be spent. Is the money for growth? Is it for an emergency? Or is it just to smooth my cash flow? Knowing how you intend to use the money yourself can impact your decisions and which type of financing to utilize. We also want to ask ourselves, am I purchasing something? If you're looking to purchase a building, a piece of equipment, or inventory, there are specific financing products for each of those situations. Which leads us right into, so what are my options? Now that we've thought about what we're trying to accomplish, we want to see what types of options we have. The chart you see on your screen is focused towards e-commerce merchants, online businesses, and marketplace sellers. Working from left to right on the top row, we can see bank loans and line of credit. Here we're talking about traditional banks and traditional lending institutions. Then we have what we do here at Payability, followed by traditional factoring companies, credit cards, both personal and business, and venture debt. So as we look at the chart and we work our way down on the left-hand side, we're looking at fast approvals. Typically for a fast approval process, we're talking 24 to 72 hours, as opposed to weeks or months. Flexibility. Is the lender flexible in how you get to be able to spend the money? E-commerce friendly. When we're talking here, we're referring to the lender's comfortability with working with e-commerce businesses and knowing how an e-commerce business operates. Daily access to funds. Are you able to access funds routinely, or are you taking one large lump sum that you then have to budget for? Limited financials. Can you apply with little to no financials, or do you need a full financial package? A full financial package for a bank can include 12 months bank statements, 2 to 3 years of tax returns, both your personal and business. It can include a personal financial statement listing out all your individual assets and liabilities. It can be references from your largest customers, accounts receivable, accounts payable, business plans, resumes, etc. So when we're talking here on the chart, we're talking about, can you essentially apply with limited financials? Understanding, so financing and cash flow go hand in hand. So let's discuss the importance of cash flow. As we look at the thought bubbles on the right, do any of these thought bubbles look or sound familiar to you? These are the real pain points as business owners we face daily as we operate our businesses. Cash flow is literally the lifeblood of your business. Not having consistent cash flow or having cash flow tied up can have several risks, whether it's not being able to make timely payments to your vendors or suppliers, not being able to cover payroll on payday, stocking out during a holiday rush or other peak season, losing the buy box because you're out of stock, or missing out on opportunities to grow your business, whether in new product verticals, discounted deals, or more inventory or marketing. Not having cash flow on hand can make an already hard task of running a business even harder. But now that you know the pains of not having cash flow, let's look at some of the opportunities on the left-hand side. Smoothing your cash flow allows you to not feel as much strain in your everyday activities when operating your business. Available cash flow allows you to sell on your terms and not have to plan your business around when you'll be paid, putting off other projects you want to take on because you don't have the money on hand yet. Cash flow also allows you to buy and turn more inventory. By having access to daily cash flow, you can purchase on a faster cadence, allowing you to scale your company faster and reach new growth. In the case of Amazon, we all know Amazon is great at driving demand. The key is being able to keep up with that demand. That's where good cash flow management, driven by available daily cash flow, allows your company to reinvest in your inventory, grow your catalog, and keep up with the unfettered demand that a marketplace like Amazon can bring. It also allows you to start budgeting and forecasting. Budgeting is harder when you don't know when you're getting paid. By understanding and having control of your cash flow, you're able to look ahead at the next 3, 6, 9, 12, and 18 months, which allows you to be able to plan for when you're going to make those large inventory purchases and plan for when you want to take on seasonal opportunities as well as invest more in marketing. This also leads us to forecasting. Forecasting, which is essentially making estimates of future developments in your business, such as sales, expenditures, and profits, while looking at the larger industry, market, and economic factors, is much harder when you don't have the control or understand when your cash is flowing in and flowing out, and not having it on a repeatable, scalable process. And finally, on the last slide we have here, to kind of bring it full circle with what Zach was talking about at Gambeh and what we're going to hear Jason talk about at OFX, when we start to couple products with other products, that's when we begin to unlock a lot of new opportunities for our business. Let's look at the example here with Gambeh and our Instant Advance. By using all the tools that Zach mentioned earlier, together with a seamless product like our Instant Advance, you're able to order inventory on demand and keep up with any new trends while you're looking to invest in without having to sign your life over to a bank, as we were talking about earlier. If we look at the way we can couple with OFX and what Jason will discuss, having the daily cash flow, and we were just speaking about the importance of that, but being able to have that cash flow in whatever currency you need it in, so you're not bound to any one geographic location to operate your business and sell, allows you to open up all sorts of new global opportunities as well. Whether we're looking at those the vendors or the manufacturers in places like China, or we have outsourced staff and virtual assistants all around the world. Being able to pay our vendors, our employees, and suppliers in the currency of their choice just removes a lot of the friction from everything we're trying to accomplish. And speaking of currency, I think Jason will take us through what OFX does.
Thanks for that, Alex. Just brief introduction. My name is Jason Sudbury. I'm the Alliances and Partnership Manager here at OFX, and we are a money services business that helps all kinds of individuals and businesses move money safely and securely internationally and cross-border. And today we just want to take you through some high-level use cases and some information that will hopefully be useful to you and you can implement right away and hopefully get some savings into your business right off the hop. So just in terms of thinking about taking our business international, we're going to take a few minutes here to share some information that if you've started selling internationally or you're just starting to think about it, data from multiple sources is confirming that this is the opportunity for growth. But as we expand internationally, there are considerations we must think about as business owners to make sure that we're maintaining our margins and profitability, because revenue is great, but not really at the cost of profits. And so what we've highlighted here are just a couple of recent data sets from FTI Consulting's Retail Report and eMarketer's Report for 2019. And what this data is telling us is that while the U.S. online market sales are growing at a relatively healthy rate, I believe just over 10% as it is today, it's been gradually slowing since 2017 through to 2019. And it does raise the question if we've reached a bit of an inflection point in terms of really rapid high growth in the U.S. market. But when we look at the data, it also tells us that the international markets are continuing to grow at a much higher rate. Europe, Asia, others, they provide a great opportunity for us to expand our sales. These regions are still experiencing growth between 19 and 25% annually. And so when we look at this opportunity and we expand into international markets, what comes with that is the need to send and receive money cross-border. There's plenty of research out there that's been done that confirms allowing buyers or vendors to transact in their local currency, making it easier for them. This is going to give your business a competitive advantage over those who don't. So in the next few slides, we're just going to highlight some options for international transactions. We'll highlight where there can be some hidden costs, and we'll look at some tools you can use to improve your bottom line as well. So when it comes to cross-border transactions, there are other options available to you than the ones we are going to be highlighting here today. But we're just going to have a brief look at the three that account for the bulk of transactions today. So the three main providers out there are banks, merchant service providers, and money services businesses. All three are going to get the job done. However, when it comes to the cost and the speed of your foreign exchange, that's where there's differences you should be thinking about. So generally, all three of these providers, they can receive payments from foreign buyers. Most of them can send money to foreign vendors. All of them are regulated. They're secure. They're required to have a license to do business. But there are some things you want to consider when you're evaluating which option you want to use. So when it comes to banks, many banks have really high transaction fees on top of the foreign exchange fee. And it could be anywhere from $15 to $50 per transaction. And so this can really significantly add up if you're doing a high volume of transactions. And banks often reserve their preferential rates for very high volume customers. So if you're not a high volume customer, it's very likely you're paying higher FX rates than you need to. In some cases, smaller regional banks are limited in what currencies they support. They don't have additional FX tools to help your business, and we'll discuss some of what some of those tools are in a few minutes. And then the other thing to consider with banks is they often have slower transaction times, upwards of 3 to 5 days to transact a wire. And that's something to think about. If your inventory is sitting on a dock somewhere and your vendor's awaiting payment, you want to make sure that that payment's getting to your vendor. If it's late, we've seen instances where seller shipments are being delayed. So the next group we have here are acquirers and merchant services, and these are acquirers and aggregators. And for simplicity for today, we've kind of combined merchant acquirers and aggregators in the same bucket. They essentially offer the similar service, card payment and card not present services. And just for reference, an example of a merchant acquirer would be somebody like Global Payments, Visa, MasterCard. And an aggregator would be somebody like PayPal, somebody who's going to aggregate a bunch of payments and they actually do the transaction through their merchant account. So these are great options for your customers. They're fast, they're easy, but they're not a great option for repatriating profits from overseas sales. So foreign exchange on credit cards and other merchant services, it's often really high. As high as 3 to 5% is added on top of the currency exchange, and that's not even taking into account your transaction fees. And many of these providers, they don't offer tools to hedge against fluctuations in the currency market. And that's areas that can cost you money when you're actually transferring your sales revenue and it's converted back to your local currency. And so what we believe a better option is to combine your merchant services with a money services business. And we'll review a use case on this in a minute. But simply put, money services businesses, this is generally any company that transmits or converts money. So Western Union, OFX, we're all money services businesses. And as specialists in foreign exchange, most money services businesses will be able to provide you a lower foreign exchange rate than a bank or a merchant provider. And some do not charge a fee on those actual transactions to initiate them. And then in terms of speed, some can transfer your payments as fast as next day. And so when we kind of think back to our example of your, inventory sitting on a dock, being able to make sure that your payment can get to your vendor next day is going to be important. But like any service, there's some things you just definitely want to consider when you're evaluating different money services business. Not all have FX services to help you hedge or limit against the fluctuations in currency. And we'll talk about that in the upcoming slides. Some money services businesses are digital-only platforms, and they'll have limited or no customer support really to speak of. And so one of the questions you might want to ask yourself is, do you want to be able to talk to somebody live when you have questions? You want to know where your money is. And then just finally, you may want to consider who their banking partners are. So when you're looking at and evaluating a money services business, you want to think about, are they partnered with tier 1 banks, or are they partnered with some banks that you've never heard of? So we've highlighted some options and what to think about when evaluating international payments. So we'll take a look at a couple of use cases, and we'll use this to show you how you can save some money on your transactions. So the first use case we're going to look at here is bringing profits home. And we're going to use the UK as our example. And in this example, you're selling on an international marketplace in the UK, and you want to bring your revenue back home. The challenges with this, however, are that if you're using a merchant provider, as we discussed in the last slide, we know you're likely paying a high percentage on your currency conversion for the sales revenue if you're going to use this merchant to convert your currency. And that's going to eventually eat into your profits. The other challenge is if you want to get paid in Great British pounds and move the money yourself, it's going to require you to have a Great British pounds account. And to have an account in the UK, it would require you to actually register your business there. If you're not registered in the UK, you're not going to be able to go into a bank and actually open up an account. So to solve for this and for both of these challenges, the solution really you want to look at is opening what's called a global currency account, or you might have heard it referred to as a virtual account. And you can do this through some money services businesses like OFX. And what this essentially allows you to do is this allows your business to open a domestic account, and in this case, the example being the UK, and receive your Great British pounds in that domestic account. So the way it works is you'd have your marketplace payouts or your payments from your merchant service provider paid into your Great British pounds global currency account. And then from there, you're going to move those funds through your currency exchange provider at a much better rate, saving you money on your currency exchange. The other benefit of having this account, because it's a domestic account, is you can use it as a local account to pay out of. So if you have taxes to pay or a payment to a vendor in that local currency, you can actually use those Great British pounds or whatever other currency to pay out of to that. And this avoids the cost of potentially double conversion. So, bringing your money back only to reconvert it and have to pay a tax bill in a foreign jurisdiction. Opening a global currency account is it's a fairly simple process. So if you don't have one today, you should open up one as soon as possible, and you'll start saving money right away on these transactions and bringing your money back home. All right, so our next use case we're going to look at just real quickly is paying suppliers abroad, and we're going to think of this in using a tool called a forward contract. So if you're buying inventory from suppliers overseas, your business is exposed to FX risk. And to put it simply, foreign exchange risk is the risk that your business's financial performance will be affected by fluctuations in the exchange rate between currencies. And this can have a significant impact on your business, and you want to make sure that this risk is managed using currency exchange tools. And one of those tools that can help is what's called a forward contract. And for those that don't know what a forward is, a forward allows you to lock in a favorable exchange rate today and then transfer your funds at this better rate at a later date in the future. And for your business, this provides you predictability in the cost, your cost of buying goods. And so the strategy here is to build your currency rate into your direct costs. It gives you cost certainty. And this allows you to project what your sales price needs to be in order to maintain your margins. So we're going to just kind of use an example here of comparing a buyer making 3 payments to an Asian supplier at whatever the market rate is at the given time. And so here, the supplier is purchasing inventory from China. They have 3 payments of 350,000 Chinese yuan every 2 months. And when they make these 3 transactions and we add it up at the different the currency rates in which they had to make those transactions, the final cost of the business was $153,879 US dollars. So now let's compare that to a buyer who used a forward contract for the exact same period of time. So a forward contract, same period of time, same 3 payments, 350,000 won, but locked in at an initial favorable rate of 6.8621. And so using the forward contract, not only did the buyer have cost predictability, but they saved $1,200 or almost $1,200 on the exact same payments. And so that's savings that goes directly into your pocket. And this is where the smart sellers, this is where they outperform the ones without a strategy, because you're acquiring goods at a lower cost. And because you know your cost, it allows you to be more price competitive when listing your products. And so just, a final thought on having a currency strategy. In the past month, we've seen a fair bit of turmoil due to Brexit and other world issues. And to highlight this and how it can hit your business, we looked at some recent dates and data points. And just more specifically in the Great British Pound and USD, on December 1st, the Great British Pound USD was trading at about, let's just say just under 1.3. And then in just 11 days later, it was trading at just over 1.32. And so what this was a movement of 2.34% in just 11 days. And so if you're an importer paying in Great British Pounds, products now just got 2.34% more expensive. Or if you're transferring money out, you're now getting 2.34% less. And so for $1 million in purchases, that's $23,400 more expensive or less money. So that's a big difference, regardless of the size of your business. And to put that in perspective, that could be the equivalent of 6 to 7 full-time employees during the holiday season at $20 an hour. So, if there's one piece of advice I want people to take away from today, it's this: that you absolutely have a currency strategy, should absolutely be working with a currency specialist if you're doing any kind of cross-border business, regardless of the volume. Essentially, without it, you're potentially losing money on every transaction that you make. And so with that, we've actually reached the end of today's webinar. And just to briefly summarize, Gambeh took some time to share with us how we can iterate and improve in our supply chain in dealing with overseas vendors. And Payability introduced us some ways we can access capital and maintain good cash flow to help scale our business. And hopefully OFX highlighted some options to improve your margins, whether you're buying or selling internationally. So as you look back and review your performance over this past year, we believe that by looking at these areas of your business that we presented today, you can be even more successful as you move forward. So Gambeh, Payability, and OFX would like to thank you all for attending today's webinar. We're now going to open up for any questions that you might have, but please feel free to contact any of us. We'll be happy to answer any questions that anybody has and expand on anything that we discussed today. And so Travis, I'll open up to you to now open for questions.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Jason, and to our attendees. Alex, we did receive one question. I think you could address it. It's the question is, I have a business plan and need financing. What's the next step for me?
Thank you. It's a great question. Really, there's a little more we would have to delve into. So having the business plan is a great first step. And I think any business that hasn't done a business plan, whether it's for a lender or not, you should really go through the process of creating a business plan for yourself. It's a great tool to hold yourself accountable and kind of see how you want to grow out your business over the next coming years. If the person asking the question has a business plan and already has some time in business, then there are definitely options. It really would depend on how large they're looking to scale their business. Is this going to be a smaller business that they plan to own and operate? Is this more like a startup that they're trying to scale up over time? So each one would have different options. It's a little tough to give a direct answer without knowing a couple more particulars. So I would suggest if you want to talk with me directly about it, our email's on the screen. Just feel free to shoot me an email at alexs@payability.com, because there's usually a couple more steps. But in general, business plan is usually the first big step. If this person had, let's say, 6 or 12 months time in business, there could be a lot of options, but then we would want to see, are they already producing some type of sales? Do they already have products that they're selling? So I guess the next question would almost be, while you have a business plan, are you in business? Are you looking to raise capital to enter business, or are you looking for capital to grow an already existing business? And I'd be more than happy to answer those questions directly if that user wants to just shoot me an email after the webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Jason, this question was directed to you from Jillian. She wanted to know where she could open a domestic account for OFX.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks for that question. So you can essentially start the process by registering at ofx.com or reach out to us directly. What we'd want to do is understand what markets that you're looking to sell into, and we can help you through the process. It's relatively straightforward, but we can, once we establish what markets or what marketplaces you're selling on, we can walk you through the process of setting up a domestic account through OFX.
Thank you. And Zach, I have a question from me. Are there any taboos that should be avoided when you're meeting with your partner or your potential partner for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being overly aggressive and showing too much emotion is something that you want to avoid. When you go into the factory for the first time, they're testing you as well as trying to observe how you react. And so, if you want to be able to show that you're experienced or show that you have not, this isn't your first rodeo going into the factory, whenever they give some sort of information to you, don't react to it, just absorb it, and then make sure that you respond accordingly with, talking about the scale of your business or talking about your challenges or how you want them to help you. So make it more of a partnership versus a reactionary, oh, this isn't going to work or something like that. Like try and overcome the hurdles together.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to all our speakers today. I appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge and expertise with us. Any questions from the audience, you can direct those to one of the 3 speakers that are listed up here, or respond to those emails that we send up following up this webinar. I believe it goes to marketing@ofx.com. We'll be monitoring that. Thank you very much.